Hello, noble ones, and welcome to Metatron's Academy. So today's topic is a little wider than that intro statement. But the idea is, you can't always trust a native speaker to be the best teacher of their languages. In fact, oftentimes, they're terrible teachers. I'd like to approach this rather complicated topic by dividing the video into two. On part one, we'll discuss the scenario whereby you got a friend and you're trying to learn their language. It's a native speaker, so you ask them, hey, how do you say this? How do you say that? Could you translate this? Could you translate that for me? On scenario 2, we're going to talk about schools, specifically language schools and language courses, PR, and how they utilize this. We've got native teachers as a way to recruit students and sort of reassure them that, you're going to get high quality courses in their school. I've got a lot of experience on the latter. Alright, so let's begin by debunking this idea of, well, a native speaker told me, so it must be right. It goes without saying that there is a lot that goes into it, lots of factors at play. What's the level of education of said speaker? Because generally speaking, native speakers speak correctly their language, very generally speaking, but there are people that don't. And depending on the level of education and also just personal ways of expression, they might be using or utilizing grammar, in fact, in an incorrect manner, which they would then end up teaching you. But really the major and main point of interest is the fact that first, just because someone is a native teacher, it doesn't mean that they have a skill set or the skill set needed in order to be able to teach you their language. That skill set needs to be acquired. Yes, some people are talented, naturally, but in general, you have to become a teacher. You're not automatically a teacher, and just because you know something, for instance, your native tongue, but also freaking mathematics, it doesn't mean that you then also know how to teach it to someone else. Completely different spheres. But apart from the actual skill set that you need in order to be able to teach properly, there is also the problem that oftentimes it's a matter of subjective versus objective knowledge, in the sense that oftentimes a person who isn't a trained teacher but is trying to teach you something, their own language, will base whatever they're trying to teach you on their own personal subjective experience, which can not only be limited to whatever that person experienced, but also perhaps to their regional variety, because of course they haven't been trained, so they don't know all the details that go into language teaching and language learning. Let me give you an example of that. A few years ago I made a video where I compared Sicilian and Italian, and of course I speak both natively. And on this video I remember this comment of this guy, and it was an American guy, but he was of Sicilian descent. And so he said that his grandmother told him that some of the words that I had presented as being useful Sicilian vocabulary, words that people in Sicily use, were in fact wrong. And he was really angry about it for some reasons. One of the words in question, and believe me, if you are Sicilian or even if you're Italian, when you hear this, you're gonna explode. But one of the words that he was contesting, and he was telling me, no one uses that in Sicily anymore, was the word amuni or amuninni. Okay, so that word means let's go. It is one of the most widely known words in Sicilian, that it's so commonly used by Sicilians to this day that even people who are not from Sicily, people in Milan, Rome, Florence, they all know that one. And yet this guy was complaining and saying that I was basically misleading people, that my teaching was worthless because I was teaching them to use a word that no one uses in Sicily. So I responded and I said, listen, I'm Sicilian. We use it all the time, and I use it with people from all over Sicily. It's a absolutely used vocabulary, that one, and there was also the word accura, which means be careful. In Italian it would be attento. Also the Italian version of amoni or amuninni would be andiamo. And that was another one that he was saying no one uses anymore, and absolutely people do. So the reason why he was basing this, even though he didn't speak Sicilian, did not speak Italian and only spoke English, was because his grandma told him so. So who was his grandma? Well, his grandmother was a Sicilian who was born and bred in Sicily, spent, 15, 16 years in Sicily, and then moved to America and stayed there until her 90s. Great. Until she was like 90 or something. Here's the thing. Of course, yes, she's native. But that doesn't mean anything, because first she's out of touch, she clearly hasn't been to the country in so many years, decades in fact, and regardless, even if in her specific family or maybe her specific area, people stopped using those expressions, that doesn't mean that no one else does in Sicily, and the fact that she was native meant absolutely nothing. She was wrong. But the guy just wouldn't listen and he got really pissed. But I digress. What I'm trying to say is, just because someone is native, it doesn't mean that you can trust them, but it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask. So it's important to make a distinction here before we jump into the PR situation with schools. And that is the fact that I'm not trying to tell you don't use in a good way natives to improve your language skills. No, absolutely do so. If in fact one of the best things you can do is to immerse yourself in the language, and natives are fantastic for that, particularly if they can't speak your language and you're kind of forced also to sort of overcome those psychological barriers that you might have if you're an introverted person. So absolutely do that. Speak to as many natives as possible, but keep in mind, just because they're natives, that doesn't make them language teachers. And that is a fundamentally important, a distinction that needs to be clear. Otherwise, you'll end up learning a lot of things that are not right. Now let's move on to schools though. Because one thing that I noticed happening, it happens a lot in Italy, and please let me know if it happens in your country as well, but there are a lot of language schools in Italy that advertise themselves by saying, oh, come to us, we've got native teachers, come to us, we've got all of our teachers are natives. And this is their way, PR department, to push their classes to mean, yes, this is proper stuff. You want to learn English? We've got Americans, we've got English people. Do you want to learn whatever French? We've got French people teaching it, so we are better. The problem with that idea is that it's in fact not true that it's always better to have a native teacher who is teaching the language that you're trying to learn. If it's only a conversation class, there are some advantages. But if it's a full-on course, are you trying to get an international exam certification? Well, you need someone who is properly trained. Doesn't matter if they're natives, someone who understands the exam. In fact, someone who did take the test, coming from the same perspective and same language as you, and got excellent results, and has a great track record. That's a teacher you want. Not necessarily someone who doesn't know anything about the exam, but they're natives. So the idea is, yes, there is absolutely a sort of tier list of how good of a teacher you can get in any given classroom or language course. But the idea is not, native teacher is the best, and then you've got the non-native teachers that we don't even hire. That is a very wrong approach. The best tier list is the following. Number one is going to be bilingual professionals. If they have a bilingual professional, a person who was brought up or learned both languages very early on in their lives, and they're also trained, that's top tier. That's like the best you can get, because they understand all the details of both languages and they went through the process, possibly even better if they have field experience. Secondly, you can put a native teacher or a high-level professional who is not native. So which one of those two is going to be better is a case-by-case scenario. You will have situations in which, yes, it's a professional, but this native teacher is really good. Like, very highly motivating, because there is also charisma, there are also interdisciplinary and interpersonal skills that go into the massive bubble of skills that is teaching in general, and also apply to language teaching. So maybe, yeah, the native teacher will be better because this guy, yeah, he's a professional, they studied it, but I mean, they're not really good at languages anyway, so yeah, they got the degrees, but you got plenty of those. But you also have native teachers who are horrible at teaching, and just because they're natives, that doesn't mean that that's a great idea and they are going to be better. Once again, whether a native teacher or a high-level professional who's non-native, which one is better is kind of a case by case. If they're both same level of professionalism, then yes, the native will be a better choice. Usually. Kind of depends. Last will be a non-native, non-professional. And you might think, yeah, but who's going to want to have a class from someone who's not a native, but they're not even professional? So that's going to be like 70 or 80% of all language teachers in schools, particularly public schools in Italy. Go figure. Country's horrible at speaking other languages. Well, at least now it's getting better, though. It is getting better. I'm mostly talking about when I was a kid. To be fair, however, there are also some great advantages when it comes to having a native teacher in your classroom. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, one of the schools that I was teaching in, I think had a good repertoire of teachers, because they had both non-native high-level professionals and native speakers and teachers, and then we would all collaborate and really bring forth the best you can. In fact, having multiple teachers usually is the best thing, and this is why, for example, learning languages at university, it's great because you have lots of different teachers, and then you have one specialized in grammar, one is specialized in conversation. This one is a native speaker, maybe another native speaker but with a different accent. Sometimes university provides that depending on what university you attend, and that's why that would be the best situation. But some of the advantages of a good native teacher are, of course, the fact that they've got the best pronunciation. So particularly if that's the one accent that you're trying to pick up, if you will, then great. Like everything they say, you can try and mimic. But then again, if they're not professionally trained in linguistics or phonology, and they're not actually accent coaches, then sometimes it's not easy for them to communicate their accent to you. And unless you have a great ear, you might not be able to pick it up as much as you'd think. So once again, is this a professional we're talking about? Another advantages of native speakers, of course, is the fact that they have usually a very big vocabulary pool they can draw from. But whether or not they can translate that into your language really depends, which is why I think that a bilingual is fantastic in those situations. Last but not least, usually native speakers will give you the most natural translation or adaptation, or the most natural way to say something within any specific context. So if you're trying to do role plays, reenactments and such, it either has to be a good native teacher or it needs to be a high professional with field experience. And that connects to when I was saying field experience, because you can study all you want from books, but if you take someone who moves to the country, for example, when I moved to Japan and lived there for 4 years, or when I moved to the UK and lived there for 2 years, the amount of natural vocabulary and sentence structure that I picked up just by living there and interacting with native speakers was great. And I could have studied 20 years at university and not reach the same level of not only ability to speak and communicate, but also to communicate that to my students. And that's why I think spending time in these countries is absolutely paramount for the main formative years of any language teacher or future teacher and translator. All in all, there are of course pros and cons, but please do not detach yourself from this myth that a native speaker or a native teacher is always the best when it comes to finding someone who can teach you the language. No, you have to question it. You have to question everything everyone says. Absolutely mingle with natives as much as possible, but a high level, highly trained bilingual is the best type of teacher. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you have your own opinions on this matter and what you think in the comments below as usual. And thank you for joining Metatrons Academy.